Before the 20th century, beauty had one job: to signal status. To show the world that you were wealthy, delicate, and untouched by labor. Pale skin meant you never worked under the sun. A corseted waist meant you could afford not to move. Long, elaborate hair meant you had servants to style it every morning. Beauty was a costume, and it was designed to keep women still. But then, something happened that no fashion magazine, no aristocrat, and no cultural tradition could have predicted. 2 world wars rewrote the rules. Completely. And the woman who emerged from the rubble looked nothing like the one who entered it. This is the story of how global conflict became the unlikely architect of modern beauty. To understand how much things changed, we need to understand what came before. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, the ideal woman was what historians called the Gibson girl, a term coined after illustrator Charles Dana Gibson, whose drawings defined American beauty for an entire generation. She was tall, corseted, with an impossibly narrow waist, a full chest, and hair piled high on her head like a crown. She looked powerful, but she was designed to be decorative. Her beauty required hours of preparation. Corsets so tight they literally deformed ribs over time. Hair so elaborate it needed professional help to construct. Skin kept pale through parasols, gloves, and careful avoidance of sunlight. She was a symbol, not of freedom, but of femininity defined entirely by restriction. And then, in the summer of 1914, the world went to war. When the men left for the front lines, someone had to keep civilization running. Factories needed workers. Hospitals needed nurses. Offices needed staff. And for the first time in modern Western history, women filled those roles. Millions of them. Almost overnight, the corseted, immobile Gibson girl became a liability. You cannot operate heavy machinery in a corset. You cannot run through a hospital ward with your hair piled 18 inches above your head. You cannot load ammunition with gloves on. Practicality didn't just influence fashion, it demolished it. The corset began to disappear. By 1917, the U.S. War Industries Board actually asked women to stop buying corsets to conserve metal for the war effort. American women complied, and in doing so, freed up 28,000 tons of metal, enough to build 2 battleships. Hair followed. The iconic bob cut, short, clean, functional, exploded in popularity during World War I. It was practical. It was hygienic. It was fast. But something deeper was happening beneath the surface. Women were discovering something that no beauty standard had ever given them before. The experience of their own bodies as capable, strong, and useful. Not decorative, functional. And that changed everything. The 1920s arrived like an exhale after years of holding your breath. The women who had worked, grieved, and survived the war were not going back to corsets. The flapper emerged, and she was a radical figure. Short hair, short skirts, flat chest, deliberately flattened with binding. She moved freely. She danced. She smoked in public. She drove cars. The beauty ideal had shifted from restriction to liberation, and the body itself became a statement. For the first time, a tan was becoming fashionable, largely credited to Coco Chanel, who appeared tanned after a Mediterranean vacation in 1923 and made sun-kissed skin desirable almost overnight. This was revolutionary. For centuries, pale skin had meant wealth and status. Dark skin meant outdoor labor, poverty. But now, a tan meant leisure. It meant you had time and money to vacation in the south of France. Beauty standards don't just change randomly. They follow power, and power was shifting. Then, the world went to war again. And this time, the transformation went even deeper. By 1939, women weren't just filling civilian roles. They were being actively recruited into industrial and military work on a massive scale. In the United States, the government launched one of the most successful propaganda campaigns in history, centered around a fictional character named Rosie the Riveter. "We can do it," the poster declared. And women did. But here's what most history books don't tell you. The government didn't just ask women to work. They actively restyled femininity to make work compatible with beauty. Because they understood something important. If women felt they had to choose between being feminine and being useful, some would hesitate. So beauty became patriotic. Companies like Tangy Cosmetics ran advertisements with the slogan, "A woman's lipstick is one of those feminine rights that our boys are fighting to preserve." Red lipstick in particular became a symbol of resistance. Winston Churchill reportedly ordered that lipstick production continue in Britain throughout the war, for morale. Women in uniform wore it. Factory workers wore it. It said, "We are still here. We are still ourselves." Meanwhile, nylon stockings, a wartime luxury, disappeared from shelves when nylon was redirected to make parachutes. Women painted lines down the backs of their legs to mimic the seam of a stocking. They adapted. They improvised. They maintained beauty, not as vanity, but as defiance. When the war ended in 1945, something unexpected happened. There was a backlash. Christian Dior launched his new look in 1947, and it was, in many ways, a deliberate return to restriction. Cinched waists, full skirts, soft shoulders. Some women embraced it. After years of uniforms and practicality, glamour felt like a luxury. But others resisted. Women who had spent years in factories, in military roles, in positions of real responsibility, they didn't forget what their bodies could do. The seeds of what would become the feminist movements of the 1960s and 70s were planted directly in the soil of wartime experience. Women had seen themselves differently, and you cannot unsee that. But the war didn't only change how women looked, it changed medicine itself. World War I produced something the world had never seen before. Thousands of soldiers returning with faces disfigured in ways that had no precedent. Modern weapons, shells, poison gas, they left wounds that couldn't be hidden. This is where modern plastic surgery was born, not from vanity, but from necessity. New Zealand surgeon Harold Gillies developed entirely new techniques to reconstruct shattered faces. He treated more than 5,000 soldiers during the First World War alone. Men, for the first time in history, became the subject of surgery aimed at improving appearance. And here is what most people don't realize. The war didn't just reshape beauty standards for women, it pulled men into the conversation entirely. For centuries, appearance had been considered a feminine concern. Men weren't supposed to care how they looked. That was vanity, weakness. But when a soldier came home with half his face missing, suddenly society had to confront a question it had never asked before. Does a man have the right to look like himself again? The answer was yes, and the techniques built to answer that question didn't disappear when the war ended. What was built to repair soldiers' faces became the foundation of the entire cosmetic surgery industry we know today. The war didn't just change how women approached beauty, it forced men into the equation for the first time. And in doing so, it shattered one of the oldest social taboos in history.
Beauty standards have never been just about beauty. They are maps of power. They show us who is valued, who is controlled, and what a society believes women are for. The world wars didn't liberate women. That work took generations more. But they cracked something open. They created a gap between the woman society expected and the woman experience had created. And in that gap, something irreversible began. The next time you see a woman in a sharp suit, with short hair, wearing red lipstick, know that somewhere in that image is the echo of a factory floor, a hospital ward, and 2 world wars that changed what it meant to be beautiful. Thank you for watching MindGlow. If this made you think, subscribe, because we're just getting started.